Can I confront Mr. Thompson before he destroys our dreams? The truth about our home may shatter everything. The sky was still an angry shade of gray as the aftermath of Hurricane Elena swirled around me, debris scattering like lost hopes scattered on the wind. I felt a sense of dazed disbelief as I rummaged through my pocket for my phone, the screen lighting up to unleash a horrible truth. Loan application denied flashed before me in cold, unforgiving letters from United Trust Bank. My heart raced, fueled by disbelief and desperation. Just days before we were set to close on our dream home, the lifeline we had pined for, the very place that promised to be our bright future, had dissipated into a terrifying void. How could they withdraw our mortgage just before the finish line? My family had been counting on this home, and now here we were, homeless and staring into the abyss, stranded in a storm of uncertainty. Across the table, Mr. Thompson, the loan officer with an unsettling smirk plastered on his face, shifted his weight as if to assert his authority. His dark eyes flickered with something sinister, a glint that made my skin crawl. He was one of those men who thrived against the backdrop of chaos, exuding a confidence that bordered on arrogance. I had known he was trouble the moment I met him, but desperate times called for desperate measures, and venturing into his office had felt like our only option, the one slim chance to secure our new life. High-risk conditions, he had declared, as if those words weren't ripping apart the very fabric of my family's dreams. It was said casually, like he was discussing the weather, while I could feel the walls that had begun to close in with each syllable. Months of planning had culminated in this agonizing moment. We had sold our beloved old home, the one where my children's laughter echoed in the halls, and poured our savings into inspections and down payments. We imagined barbecues in the backyard and bedtime stories in their new rooms. Now all that remained was a long list of disputes and unanswered questions. The whispers around the neighborhood had become louder after the hurricane, tales of eroded trust and shattered dreams. Our plans felt as tempest-tossed as the branches that littered the streets outside, caught in the chaos of cardboard boxes and furniture strewn haplessly on curbs. No help from neighbors emerged as we battled this brewing storm. Days turned into a blur, each one filled with, "Sorry, we can't help" phone calls that spiraled into a symphony of frustration with the bank's customer service. Every inquiry yielded the same response. The rules had changed. In secret meetings and conference calls, some banker in a boardroom somewhere was pulling strings that danced around us, leaving us to flounder without a safety net. It felt like a sick joke that they had crafted their own narrative, effectively rewriting the rules of lending just when we finally thought we had everything secured. They saw us as nothing more than a number of risk, and the more I pressed, the more I felt like I was being pushed to the edge of the cliff. Scouring my fading optimism, I pieced together bits of information amongst the turmoil, discovering that we weren't alone in our plight. Others were also falling victim to this changing tide. Rumors leaked through the community like whispers of a ghost story. It was said United Trust Bank suddenly decided to tighten their lending practices due to the hurricane's devastation. But no official announcement had been made, just the slow suffocation of hope hanging in the air. Each time I reached a real person at the bank, I felt like a ghost myself, hovering somewhere between sanity and despair. Why wasn't anyone listening? During a sleepless night, I crafted an email to Mr. Thompson, pleading for answers. But I knew better. He had been the prison warden, not the savior. His dismissive replies now flooded my inbox, each one steeped in condescension, as if I were a child begging for mercy instead of a responsible homeowner seeking justice. "The guidelines are out of my control," he would write. His tone dripped with the kind of insincerity that made my stomach churn. I could almost hear him laughing at my desperation. As we wandered through weeks of silent stares and muffled cries for help, I couldn't shake the feeling we had been set up to fail. With every unanswered call, every lost night, the walls of despair crept closer, darkened by doubts that whispered of betrayal. I could sense my husband's unease in every sideways glance. He had long since ceased to sleep well, the weight of our children's future resting heavily on his shoulders. Worse than being denied the house was the knowledge we were stranded in a titanic sea of financial treachery. Water dripped from the eaves of our temporarily rented apartment, mingling with tears as I tried to reassure my children that everything would be all right. I had to believe we wouldn't just be driftwood in a storm. Our lives were supposed to be anchored together in this journey. Yet, the knowledge of hidden motives hung heavily in the air as I wondered how even a storm could unearth the darker elements of human nature. I stayed up late, wondering what tower of deceit I might topple if I dared to push further into this treacherous world of banking and corruption. Perhaps Mr. Thompson had something to hide that I was yet unaware of. As I fought through the escalating chaos both in my heart and in the world around me, it became clear that our struggle was not a simple tale of paperwork and lending rules. Like the shifting tides outside my window, there was something much deeper at play. A mystery loomed just beyond my reach, hinting that the resolution of our nightmare was woven into a storm much greater than the one that ripped through our neighborhood. What if unearthing the truth meant facing our greatest fears? My resolve hardened with determination. This fight for our home had just begun, and I was not ready to let go yet. Next time, I would confront Mr. Thompson not as a victim but as a warrior determined to expose the cracks that lay beneath his polished facade. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of our short-term rental like a half-hearted comfort, illuminating the chaos of my newly disrupted life. As I stared at the walls, devoid of the familiar warmth of home, my chest tightened with anxiety while I attempted to wrap my head around the words from United Trust Bank that ricocheted in my mind. Loan application denied. Those chilling words felt like daggers, each one twisting deeper as I remembered my conversation with Mr. Thompson, the very man who held our dreams hostage. In a series of heated calls filled with empty assurances, Mr. Thompson switched from calm to condescending, insisting, "You were in a high-risk zone, Miss Hall." The way he said my name dripped with a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. I could barely catch my breath. My old house had been sold, and every penny of our savings had vanished into inspections and renovations that now felt like a cruel joke. I refused to back down from this fight and hastily dialed the bank's main office, determined to unearth the truth behind their new lending policies. To my dismay, I was met with a wall of silence. Representatives talked in circles, swathed in corporate jargon that soothed their consciences, but left me feeling more isolated than ever. Each "we can't assist you" rebounded against the walls of my frustration, breeding the kind of desperation that clawed at my insides. It felt like I was battling a corporation that was strategically concealing the truth about their fickle lending guidelines, and each call left me more acutely aware of my own helplessness. Driven by that aching need for answers, I took to the internet, scouring forums and social media platforms for anyone who might share my plight. The whispers of others who had encountered similar roadblocks began to materialize like a gathering storm cloud. They, too, found themselves at the mercy of vague policies that suddenly favored only the bank's interests. This battle stretched far beyond myself. It was a wave of chaos sweeping through our community as it became clear that this was not just an isolated case, but a dangerous trend. As days turned into a blur of relentless phone calls and frustrating emails, I couldn't shake off the growing rage that simmered beneath my calm exterior. I felt like a jungle animal trapped in a small cage, every attempted escape thwarted, every effort met with grim indifference. Each time I reached Thompson on the phone, he seemed almost amused by my plight, responding with that infuriatingly placid demeanor that made me want to scream. His dismissive comments only stoked the hunger for justice within me, and I made a mental note to dig deeper into the bank's recent practices. One sleepless night, amidst the weight of heartbreak pressing down on me, I finally crafted an email to Thompson, a plea that screamed for accountability. But the aftermath of each vexing reply served as a reminder that he was no savior to our dire situation. His words dripped with condescension. "The guidelines are out of my control." With each electronic communication, I couldn't shake the feeling that he relished this power he wielded over us, ensuring our suffering was met with cold acknowledgement rather than compassion. As I scoured every detail surrounding our denied mortgage, a frightening realization washed over me. The desperation and betrayal cut deeper as I encountered bits of information that hinted at the bank's true intentions. The rules had changed behind closed doors, and we were the unsuspecting casualties of their financial gladiator sport. This shocking revelation, that our lives and futures hung in the balance of casual boardroom discussions, darkened my days further still, and laid heavily on my heart. Contemplating our future as those dreary evenings passed, I felt my husband Chris grow more withdrawn. I could see how the weight of our children's future crushed him, a visual reminder of the stakes we faced. Each whisper of wind outside our temporary apartment seemed like an echo of my despair, a relentless reminder that somewhere out there, away from the safety of our own home, our brightness had dimmed. As I leaned against the wall, tears welling in my eyes, I silently vowed not to become a victim of this cruel tide. Our fight was just beginning. Little did I know then the secrets and hidden agendas waiting to be unearthed in this treacherous world of banking. What I had initially thought was a straightforward transaction had become a perilous labyrinth, one where each turn could either lead to salvation or an abyss of despair. I should have been prepared for the storm, but now the true tempest, one fueled by human greed and deceit, loomed on the horizon, and I was ready to confront it head-on. The mornings dragged on like molasses, each one stirring me from fitful sleep in our cramped rental, where the walls closed in around my mounting anxiety. I glanced at Chris. His worried brow creased as he stared into the void of uncertainty that had gripped our lives. Around us, the remnants of Hurricane Elena had soaked the earth and shattered our dreams, but it was the cold rejection from United Trust Bank that left us feeling truly unmoored. Their message echoed with haunting frequency in my mind. Loan application denied. It was as if fate was mocking us as we drifted further into perilous waters. As days stretched into countable weeks, exhaustion took its toll. The eviction notice hung heavily over my thoughts, a chilling countdown that sent me spiraling into fits of anger and despair. Each time I called Mr. Thompson, he danced artfully around my questions, wielding his smug authority as if it were a cloak. I struggled to maintain my composure while he smugly insisted, "You were in a high-risk zone, Miss Hall," like a zip-tied trophy to his victories over my shattered expectations. My old home was gone, and everything we'd invested was now resting on the precipice of disaster. It wasn't just the denial of our mortgage that gnawed at my core. It was the palpable deceit wrapped around Thompson, as though he thrived on our collective misery. Anger coursed through me, simmering just beneath the surface, especially when he casually mentioned, "The guidelines have changed, and frankly, there's nothing I can do about it." My fingers itched to retaliate, to dig deeper into the labyrinthine policies that could ruin our lives if left unchecked. I refused to accept that my family's future was determined by a man as unscrupulous as Mr. Thompson. The nights often turned into my sanctuary of thought, those quiet hours transforming my frustration into a palpable resolve. If Thompson was hiding something, then I would uncover it. With fortitude, I began scouring the depths of social media. For the wrestled among the daily posts of happier lives, I found snippets of chatter. A forum dedicated to disgruntled homebuyers revealed whispers of violations and vague references to secret bulletins about lending criteria. My instincts flared as I followed the breadcrumbs to a potential revelation. After days of sleuthing, the pieces began falling into place. A parade of vague terms structured around mortgage rules, an unseen shift in the bank's practices driven by corporate greed. And then it landed squarely on my shoulders, Mr. Thompson had knowledge of that secret bulletin detailing the revised criteria for Florida mortgages, but chose not to share it. The realization electrified me, igniting not just my fury, but a primal desire for justice. If I could confront Thompson with evidence of his deception, perhaps I could rattle his foundation. One early morning at dawn, with the daylight still dim, I steeled myself and prepared for the confrontation. After drafting an email full of calculated rage, I hit send with trembling fingers. I couldn't let fear paralyze me any longer. I needed to challenge him with the truth. Dressed in a simple blouse and slacks that felt more like armor than fabric, I walked into United Trust Bank's office that morning, my heart pounding in rhythm with each echoing step across the tiled floor. Through blurred thoughts, I imagined the meeting, the look of disbelief on Thompson's face as I laid out my findings like cards in a poker game, where the stakes were my family's future. Each heartbeat radiated a mixture of fear and conviction as I approached his office. Would he deny everything, dismiss me with a wave of his hand? Or would this confrontation expose the cracks in his carefully crafted facade? I was resolute. This was our home, and my family's stability that I was fighting for. I stepped inside his office, my breath catching as the tension in the air thickened. Thompson looked up from his screen, an amused smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. I felt a surge of adrenaline, seizing the moment. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. I have some questions about the revised mortgage criteria, and some information I believe you failed to disclose to me," I began, my voice steady but laced with the trepidation of what lay ahead. The moment hung in the silence, charged with unspoken words and a resolute hunger for truth. "You really think that you have a case here, Miss Hall?" he replied, leaning back in his chair with a patronizing air that made my blood boil. His dismissive tone wrapped around my anger like a vice grip, fueling my determination to lay bare the truth of his deceit. I could feel the weight of proof resting in my hands as I prepared to take action. Little did Thompson know, this was just the beginning of a much larger battle that lay ahead. When I burst into Mr. Thompson's office that afternoon, a storm of conflict whirled inside me, matching the clouds darkening the Florida sky outside. My mind raced with furious thoughts as I brandished my findings like a weapon. He sat there, smugly poised behind his polished oak desk, fingers laced confidently as if awaiting my every move. A tarantula, I realized, waiting patiently for its prey. This time I was not stepping back. I was armed with information that could rattle his carefully crafted facade. His smirk faltered slightly as I laid the evidence down on his desk, papers rustling like leaves in a tempest. "I know about the secret bulletins regarding the revised lending criteria for Florida properties, Mr. Thompson," I declared, my voice steady but edged with determination. The corner of his mouth twitched, a barely concealed reaction that fueled my confidence. "You know this isn't just about a denied mortgage, right? You've been playing with people's lives." He leaned back in his chair, feigning calmness with practiced ease. "This doesn't mean you have a case, Miss Hall," he shot back, his voice low and deliberate. But deep within, I nurtured the hope that I was about to push him out of his safe zone. I could feel something changing in the atmosphere, an unspoken acknowledgement of the impending clash. Yet, just as I thought I had him cornered, he delivered a chilling bombshell that sent my heart plummeting. The new regulations have increased risk on all Florida properties post-hurricane, he stated coolly, as if rattling off a formula from a textbook. Your property isn't even insurable. Those words struck me hard, feeling like the ground crumbling beneath my feet. The realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. This wasn't merely about our loan, it was a systemic catastrophe impacting so many aspiring homeowners in the aftermath of the hurricane. My breaths quickened as I grappled with the implications. We weren't just fighting for our home. We were swept into an industry-wide crisis that seemed designed to ensnare us in a web of despair. The very foundation upon which I had built my hopes lay shattered at my feet. Images of our once bright future danced briefly in my mind, like moths drawn to a flame, only to be scorched by the harsh reality of abandonment and betrayal. Isn't there any way around this? I pleaded, my voice cracking despite my attempts to sound resolute. You must know that this isn't fair. You must see, people are losing their livelihoods. Mr. Thompson remained unmoved, an impenetrable wall of calculation and indifference. He simply shrugged, as if my pleas were mere annoyances, irrelevant to the larger game he was playing. It was as if he thrived on chaos, relishing the power he wielded with such ruthless precision. I looked around his office, noting the framed degrees on the walls and the trivial awards that seemed like tokens in a hollow shell of achievement. This was the den of a predator, I realized. Every encapsulated moment of success framed only amplified how he reveled in the misery of others. The walls were too pristine, too bright, too comfortable while I was fighting to save everything I loved from drowning in a sea of deceit. My thoughts began racing as I realized that I needed to employ more than anger. I had to be strategic and infiltrate the very system that had betrayed us. I recalled the neighbors I had met during our short-lived community gatherings, whose stories paralleled my own like a chorus of despair. Together, we could not only fight back against Thompson, but spark a movement against this malicious cycle. Just then, inspiration struck a plan that could awaken the community to our plight. You might thwart me today, Mr. Thompson, I stated, regaining my composure, but I will not be silenced. I will unite those affected by this disaster. You may have the power now, but you underestimate the strength of our voices combined. At that moment, I sensed a glimmer of uncertainty flicker across his face, and for the first time, it felt as if his fortress was beginning to crack. My heart raced, pumping determination into my veins, like a fire ignited. Leaving his office, I knew this was merely the beginning of a long and twisted battle, one that could very well expose the pervasive corruption lurking beneath the surface of a storm-battered market, and I would not back down. As I stepped into the fading light outside, I could already envision our community rallying together, armed with our experiences. Each narrative, a brick paving the way towards justice and rectification. No longer were we mere victims, we would become agents of change, pushing back against a system that operated in darkness. Mr. Thompson may have had the upper hand for now, but I felt an exhilarating spark of hope ignite within me. This was not the end. It was a rallying cry, echoing through the humid air of Florida, signaling a revolution, one that would awaken not just the people of our neighborhood, but potentially the entire state, in a fight against inequitable practices and systemic failures. As dusk settled over our battered neighborhood, the golden light slanted through the rustling palm fronds, casting elongated shadows on the cracked pavement. It felt like a ghost town, each fading beam an echo of hope slipping through our fingers. Desperate for answers and unity, I called a meeting for the fellow victims of Mr. Thompson's deceit, those who had become increasingly restless as their dreams of homeownership sank like flotsam in a stormy sea. Word spread quickly. It seemed as if we were all drowning, and somehow we were learning to swim together in those treacherous waters. In our gathering, the room pulsed with a shared heartbeat of confusion and anger. We exchanged stories that dripped with disbelief. Janet, a firecracker with a penchant for DIY renovations, spoke of her husband's frustration at building inspectors' apathy during the storm's aftermath. Greg, a solemn single father, clutched his young daughter's hand tightly, his own eyes reflecting the challenges of a man searching for stability in chaos. Each narrative revealed layers of betrayal, and as I surveyed their troubled faces, I felt a flicker of determination spring to life within me, a raw hunger to fight back against the injustice that had left us all stranded. With notebooks and phones out, we crafted a plan. We needed a legal champion, someone passionate and relentless in their pursuit. Days later, we sat across from our new attorney, LaSalle, sprightly woman, with an untamed mane that framed her face like a lioness ready for battle. When I presented her with our case, her fierce conviction ignited a sense of renewed purpose in me. You are doing more than fighting for your homes, she asserted. You are tapping into the greater issues, suffocating homeowners in hurricane-prone areas. Just like that, our personal fight morphed into a movement. Soon, our collective outrage attracted the attention of local media, and at first, it felt exhilarating. News outlets drilled down into the corruption entwining greedy banks and the precarious realities of homeownership in a storm-ravaged landscape. I imagined the tidal wave of support and awareness crashing over us, but small cracks began to form in our seemingly impenetrable unity. As our stories circulated, Mr. Thompson's subsequent threat landed like a stone in a still pond, threatened to sue us for harassment, wielding his influence to intimidate and silence those who dared to speak out. Each demand from his office sent shockwaves through our group, the tension twisting tighter like a noose around our collective resolve. Days blurred into one another, filled with a maddening cycle of conference calls and hastily organized meetings, each one peppered with rising anxiety and the tightness of unvoiced exhaustion. I watched as fear seeped into our ranks. The spark of rebellion began to dim under the weight of Thompson's power. He wielded his connections like a sharp knife, effortlessly hacking away at the progress we had worked so hard to achieve. I knew these tactics weren't just about intimidation. They were designed to break USA's calculated move to retain the status quo for others like him. Yet, even as I lay awake at night, listening to the silence around me, plotting our next steps, I clung to the belief that all was not lost. My thoughts raced through the possibilities. We were an uprising, in a world poised to silence the voices of the vulnerable. Lisa, having witnessed the cracks in our resolve, rallied our spirits with stern encouragement, urging us to stay the course. Each echo of her words sparked flickers of defiance, fueling our determination to not only fight against Mr. Thompson, but to expose the systemic issues that had brought us together in this crucible of hardship. On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday, just after sunrise, a final, desperate call came through from Lisa. Her voice trembled with hope and anxiety as she disclosed some breakthrough news regarding Thompson's past glimmer of justice finally flickering on the horizon. Yet, as everything seemed poised to shift in our favor, the looming shadow of Thompson's wrath still hung above us like a storm cloud, ready to unleash its fury. Had we truly ignited a flame of change, or would it all flicker out before it could catch fire? As the evenings grew longer, the realization weighed heavy on my hardcore. Fight for justice might be far from over, and the wheels of resolution turned slowly, if at all. But there, amidst the darkness, we stood united, ready to face whatever storm Mr. Thompson had waiting in the wings. How much further would we have to go to grasp our chance at freedom? What more could he possibly do to try and silence us? Unbeknownst to us, the winds of change were swirling and threatening to bring about consequences we had yet to comprehend. Would we stand tall, unbroken against the rising tide, or would the impending storm drown us in its shadow? Then came a fateful evening, when an echoing phone call from the attorney's office sent shivers down my spine. It had been a long day spent trying to piece together the fragments of our shattered lives, but now I felt as though the world had momentarily ground to a halt around me. My heart raced as I answered the phone, and Lisa's voice trembled slightly as she uttered those words I had both dreaded and feared hearing. We need to discuss a larger issue at stake. Her tone was grave, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down like a thick fog, suffocating any flicker of hope I clung to. When she calmly revealed that the bank had filed a lawsuit against us, asserting pre-existing damage to the home we intended to buy, a disbelieving gasp tore from my lips. My fingers tightened around the phone as I gripped my thoughts. A violent storm brewed inside me, raging with indignation and betrayal. They claimed we were unaware of these supposed issues. We had gone through the proper channels, conducted every inspection, and yet here we were, thrust into a disbelief-induced twilight where the very ground we stood upon seemed to shift. Lisa detailed the accusations with the finesse of an archer, each word piercing through the armor of my resolve like arrows. According to the bank, they asserted that damage existed prior to our purchase agreement damage. They insisted in court would paint us as negligent homeowners. How could they cast us as villains in a narrative we had only just entered? I had spent sleepless nights imagining myself carrying the weight of this fight. Now I felt as if the very universe conspired to crush my spirit to powder. I could almost hear Mr. Thompson's mocking laughter echo in my mind, a specter of a man whose greed seemed as tumultuous as the hurricane that had shattered our neighborhood. His dark eyes, filled with malice, seemed to flicker across my thoughts, taunting me from wherever he hid amidst the shadows of his corporate lair. It felt surreal how could he twist the truth so effortlessly. The very image of our beautiful future home, the sanctuary we envisioned, was fantastically morphing into a stage for a tragic comedy where we were cast as the fools. I felt trapped, not only by the weight of the legal battle looming above us, but also by the oppressive feeling that our community was fractured, vulnerable to the orchestrations of a merciless system. As Lisa continued to speak, I imagined her valiantly advocating for us in the background, but a gloomy fog that had settled over me left little space for optimism. The weight of impending doom hung thick in the air, and I struggled to formulate a coherent response as I could barely gather my thoughts from the onslaught of revelations. With gritted teeth, I finally mustered enough strength to respond. I could hear the tremor in my voice as I suggested we counter with our own evidence, leverage the collective testimonies of fellow victims who had seen the same dishonesty in Thompson's dealings. "We will show that he is the liar, not us," I asserted, the embers of my defiance reigniting in my heart, if only for a moment. Just as Lisa began to outline our next steps, my resolve morphed into a fierce determination, the kind that had eluded me in recent weeks. As the days dragged on, Lisa became a relentless beacon of hope, unbending in her commitment to uncover the truth. She contacted the specialists to evaluate our case, carefully dissecting the pre-existing damage claims level by level. We prepared a war chest full of evidence, piecing together timelines of inspections, our correspondence with the bank, and most importantly, the testimonies collected from neighbors. Each voice strengthened our narrative. The ex-firefighter who now lived in his trailer, the retired couple forced to move in with their dot-reach tail, a lash against the visage of Thompson's fabrications. Then, in a moment that felt almost supernatural, Lisa reached out to me one evening, her voice crackling with excitement. The storm reports, the city records from after the hurricane there, was no evidence of the damage they cite in their lawsuit. My heart raced with the possibility of a turning tide. Behind Thompson's monstrous facade, perhaps lay a vulnerability that could be exploited. Perhaps this time, our passionate fight would receive the righteous justice it so desperately deserved. Yet, as easily as hope surged through me, flickering shadows of doubt remained. Would this truly be enough? Would the courts see through the obfuscation crafted by a slick bank facade? For every defeated moment, I remembered one thing with clarity. Sitting amidst comrades who understood our fight only intensified my resolve. As we matched our furious hearts against Thompson's empire of deception, it felt as if the storm brewing outside mirrored the tumult in my soul. No longer were we mere victims, we had become warriors for our collective future. How far could our resolve stretch, and what unforeseen tragedies would emerge from this brutal fight? The path corresponded with both an exhilarating thrill and an aching dread. However, one thing was certain: we were not backing down. If Thompson wanted to frame us as villains in his sordid tale, he would soon learn the depths of our determination, our resilience cast in iron as we prepared to face the ravaging winds of this fight head-on. As I stood in the courtroom, the afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows that danced nervously across the polished wooden floors. My heart thrummed like a war drum, each beat reminding me of what was at stake, not just our future, but the futures of countless families wronged by the very same corrupt system. My palms felt clammy as I faced the jury, determined not to let fear overshadow the truth I held tightly in my heart. Today was our day for justice, and I intended to fight like hell to see that it was delivered. When I took the stand, my voice trembled with a mix of anger and determination. I recounted the chaos that ensued after Hurricane Elena, the feeling of betrayal, as Mr. Thompson's smug face loomed over me during each chaotic interaction at the bank. Every detail mattered. Thompson had twisted our lives, leaving us homeless in a time of urgent need. With every recount of his tactics, from the denial of our mortgage to his fabricated claims of pre-existing damage, I felt the need for retribution surge through me. How could he, with such a clear conscience, destroy so many lives for the sake of profit? But as I dove deeper into my narrative, I noticed the expressions on the jurors' faces changing. Their brows furrowed with concern as I painted vivid pictures of my family struggling, sleeping in a cramped rental, worrying about our dwindling finances, and living under the oppressive weight of uncertainty. It was as if they could feel the toll his actions had taken on us, merely trying to carve out a new beginning after the storm. If I could evoke even an ounce of empathy, it would be a victory in its own right. Just as I found my rhythm, Lisa stood and approached with steely poise, presenting her case with undeniable clarity. She called to the stand the experts we had enlisted, who delivered damning testimony against the bank's claims. With each presentation of evidence, I felt emboldened. The past several weeks had been an uphill battle, and now this room filled with people had the power to alter the trajectory of our lives. When Lisa finally pulled out the pivotal evidence-recorded audio of Mr. Thompson admitting that the change in lending policies was based purely on speculation, the air felt electric with possibilities. A palpable silence enveloped the courtroom as those words sank in. Thompson's smug facade cracked, a flicker of panic flashing across his face for the first time. Everyone held their breath as his carefully crafted illusion began to unravel before our eyes. I knew this was the moment we had fought for. It wasn't just an admission of guilt. It was the acknowledgement that the bank had wronged us amidst their games of profit and power. The tide was turning, and hope surged through me stronger than ever. In the wake of the evidence presented, I watched as Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual bravado severely diminished. It was almost comical to witness how quickly a predator could transform into prey under the relentless spotlight of truth. My heart raced and my body hummed with adrenaline. We were on the verge of victory. I knew that this was not just about us anymore. It was a loud rallying cry against the avalanche of corruption threatening the integrity of our community and lives. When the judge banged the gavel, the decisive sound resonated like music to my ears. In favor of the plaintiffs, he declared, and that moment felt unprecedented. Relief and disbelief washed over me as tears of joy threatened to spill down my cheeks. As the gavel's echo faded, I wrapped my arms around Lisa, feeling the warmth of collective victory simmer between us and the camaraderie of those who had stood beside us throughout the battle. We did it. We had triumphed. But the battle didn't end with the judge's ruling. It sparked a fire in all of us who had been wronged. We began rallying community support, igniting a movement determined to draft legislation that would close the loopholes that allowed Mr. Thompson and the banks to manipulate the system. No longer would families like ours be left defenseless amid natural disaster and corporate greed. As we held meetings and organized protests, I realized the fight had transformed us, reinforcing the strength of unity. Mr. Thompson was not only forced to resign, he was also left answering for the pain he had inflicted upon families just trying to secure a roof over their heads. As I stood amidst the crowd of supporters at our first legislative hearing, I spoke passionately about our journey. It felt surreal to think that from the depths of despair, we were weaving a tapestry of change that would protect future homeowners. Our nightmare had turned into a beacon of hope for our community, an emblem of resilience in the face of adversity.